So the FBI come, and at this point, you know, this is now serious. This is I've either touched a nerve, and I've upset some pretty powerfully connected people, or I've made a huge mistake. Now, I know you didn't for a second think I've made a huge mistake. So at that point, what goes through your mind?
Well, that was on a Friday, very early December. I think it was December 1-ish. And I said to myself, I must be onto something huge here. Huge. And I think I tweeted out that MiMedx is equivalent to the movie and the book, The Firm.
Yeah.
Because a corporate criminal, how in the world does this guy have enough stroke to get the FBI to go visit a skeptic to tell him to shut up? And my lawyer, Shapiro, said not to say anything for a while till he figured it out, and he was going to write. And he wrote many letters to the DOJ, U.S. Attorney in San Francisco, the whole thing, who continue to cover it up to this day, which is interesting in itself. I said, someone's going to die on this MiMedx hill, and it ain't going to be me. It's either them or it's me, and it's not me, so it's going to be them. And, you know, subconsciously, I don't think people realize how sort of traumatic that whole Goldman thing was, you know, back in 2000, whenever it was, with me. And I did not want my final chapter to be it. But I said to myself, I will put everything I have mentally into this piece of shit fraud, exposing it to show people in the world that this cannot be done to others. This, you know, people have sacrificed a lot to get folks in this country to speak freely and to blow the whistle on crime and malfeasance. And I'm not gonna let this go. I am not gonna let this go. I said, I don't care if I lose money. If I make money, great. But I will take these guys down if it's the last thing I do. You know, that's how agitated and enabled I felt.
Well, what's amazing about this, when I look back over the chronology of this, is that you were like 6 weeks into this at that point. You'd first spoken about this at Jim Grant's conference.
I spoke about it
October.
at Grant's October 10th.
Right. Okay. So maybe 2 months into this. So, but we're talking 2 months in, and people are pulling out these kinds of favors to get you to shut up. So something really stinks here, because that's a big move to make when one random guy on Twitter's been making a bit of noise about you.
Well, the crazy thing is, I mean, I've had many, many, many incredible death threats directed at me over the years.
How many from Aurora?
About one a week.
Okay.
I mean, she's Spanish and she's feisty, so, you know, that's why the knives are mounted on the wall. And whenever my lawyers would go to the FBI, they'd say, go to the local police, file a complaint with so-and-so. And my lawyer, you know, Shapiro, is a former U.S. attorney. He'd say, well, this is a credible threat because of this, and this. And I have plenty of those in writing here. And they're generally not interested. So for the FBI to get a field call out of Atlanta, to then mobilize San Francisco, to then pay someone a visit at their house without warning, without being the subject of an investigation or have a warrant, is pretty over the top. It's pretty unprecedented. So Shapiro, my lawyer, and I probably figured that Parker Petit, through either Isaacson, former disgraced HHS Secretary Tom Price, and or others, forced this issue.
Now, what was it that made you think it was those guys?
Because there's no way, given the so-called tweets they were talking about, that the FBI would ever pay a visit, or they'd call my lawyer, or they'd call me and say, we got some questions, blah, blah, blah. There's no way they would. It's way out of protocol. And a close friend of mine, a fellow who used to work with me as a DEA agent, and he's an agent in the U.S. government, he says it's completely out of order for that to happen. And if anyone wanted to pay you a visit, they'd simply knock on your door, say, we'd like to talk to you. And if you'd say, I don't want to talk to you, they'd leave. They'd give their card and leave. Not the subject of anything. And the crazy thing is, I called the SEC guys. I knew something was weird because the SEC investigation on MiMedx has always been out of Denver, not Atlanta. So I called the SEC, and my lawyer called the SEC out of Denver and explained what went on, and the SEC guys were pissed. They said, why in the world would the FBI be paying a home visit to a witness in a security fraud case?
Well, now let's rewind a bit here, because at this point, the MiMedx SEC investigation, how did that start? When did you become aware of it?
It was... back when I first started just doing some work on this, I sent some stuff because these MiMedx formers were all over me with stuff. When I got Pete to back down on some of the things he said about me, people were into me with all sorts of channel stuffing allegations and proof of fraud and all sorts of illegal activity. So I sent it into, I think, Aaron Lipson out of Atlanta, who's an SEC guy who's since left and gone to work for King and Spalding. And he sent it to Denver, and an SEC attorney in Denver, Ty Cottrell, contacted me with it and got the ball rolling there.
But that's interesting that they would send it out of Atlanta, because that to me says that there's way too much influence.
Right. There's again, it's the Isaacs and Tom Price. There must be influence even in that office. And I can get into further detail of that later. So the MiMedx investigation is out of Denver. It always has been out of Denver, not out of Atlanta. And when I let them know that the FBI went by my house to tell me to quit tweeting, they said that was very abnormal. He said he'd never heard of anything like that. So we start putting the pieces together and say, Jesus, investigation out of Denver, not Atlanta, FBI call out of Atlanta into San Francisco to tell me to quit tweeting or there'll be consequences. I mean, I'm like thinking that I went tuna fishing and have hooked a whale here.
Right.
And simultaneously, MiMedx is suing Viceroy, Fraser Paring, Capital Forum, and others.
All short sellers, vocal short sellers.
Or people who have short research out on it.
Yep.
But they never sued me, because the last guy to sue me was Mark Thompson with Concordia. MiMedx didn't sue me because they know Pete knew I had the goods on him, and he's just a little toothless wear-a-wig bully, all 5 feet of him. Pete, in his serial insanity, brags all the time how connected he is. When you're so small and you're a serial fraudster of 36 years, you constantly boast how connected you are to all these people, to let the world know that he's almost like an untouchable. Mm-hmm. And I figured, and Shapiro backed up, that this had to be the work of some operative to get the FBI out to shut me up. Now, we didn't have proof, And lawyers, being lawyers, said, well, you could always sue the FBI. I said, I'm not in the mood to cross swords with the U.S. government right now. At that point in time, I said, let's see how this plays out. We'll have time to figure out how this happened as I got into it. But it was a huge mistake of what they did, because as good as I thought I am in this line of work, they brought out the absolute best, and or if you're them, worst in me. Absolute worst.
Well, yeah, and that's something I want to dig into, because, again, our first conversation, I wanted to talk about the misperceptions of short sellers, right? They're all these just evil guys looking to cheat great companies, and it's un-American, and all this stuff that I know from my time in this business is fundamental and just nonsense. Yes, of course, there are the odd guys who make low noise and try and drive share prices down so they can make a quick growth. I totally get that. But your track record is such that anybody who jumps to that assumption about you hasn't read anything, doesn't know anything, and is making a very dangerous assumption. And I've seen the amount of work you do on these things, and it's prodigious. I mean, it's an extraordinary thing to see. So talk a little bit, when you say they bring out the worst in you, just talk a little bit about what that means in terms of your working day trying to expose this thing.
So the average person who doesn't necessarily have a job, right? I don't report to anyone. I don't have a job. I don't get a W-2. Wakes up at 7:30, has coffee with their wife, uses the treadmill, goes, plays golf or travels or does whatever. That's not me with this thing. I mean, I have a disabled son who lives on the property. He's 32. And that's my number one job, being a dad, taking care of him. But when this thing clicked me into turbo, I started waking up at 3 in the morning like a nut. And I became driven to spend all of my waking time, pretty much, other than taking care of him and being a decent husband, working on MiMedx. So when I said that to people, I don't think they truly believed what I said, but from reading documents or interviewing people or reading past tendencies of this crook, Parker Petit, and reading what they do and how they do it and trying to connect the dots and looking at the numbers, it's incredibly time-consuming.
Yeah.
And
complicated. I mean, really complicated.
Very complicated. I mean, you saw my office of what I still have spread out. And when I said this is a 12-step fraud, it's everything from ripping off Medicare, Medicaid, private insurers, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Texas, FDA issues, accounting issues, bribes, threatening whistleblowers, threatening skeptics, securities fraud. The strings and the level of this is something I've never quite seen for a company at the time with $1.3 billion market cap. So there were many parallel tracks here, and Parker accused people of being in a cabal and a wolf pack and had conference calls where it's just insane. And I know the Viceroy guys. I have great respect for Fraser Paring. He's a brilliant mind, and Aurelius and others. But they also made a mistake of writing a letter to First Analysis, who had an analyst named Joe Munda, I call him Mango, following this thing. And Parker wrote a letter to the head of that firm and said that Munda's involved with these illegal short sellers, and if you don't rein them in, we'll threaten to sue you. And First Analysis, being the chicken shit outfit they are, they caved to them. And this is a huge problem. See, everyone who always historically has caved to Parker, right, because they didn't want to get sued, they didn't want to take them on, just gives him more momentum, gives him more grist to the mill that he is invincible. So Frazier bent his back and fought the suit. Aurelius fought it. Sparrow fought it. First Analysis caved. Capital Forum caved. Dropped coverage. But Munda, a wonderful man and a great analyst, I was in touch with him constantly because he didn't like being silenced. And he did an inordinate amount of background work on this thing as well. So he helped me a lot, but he couldn't write on it. He had a sell recommendation on the stock at $14, and it was a tremendous piece of research. And he was dead right for the right reasons. But they screwed with his business, and they screwed with him where he couldn't cover it. But he knew what they were doing to me, and he said, anything I can do to help you, I will. So, as you know, I'm not a rocket scientist. I'm not a guy who knows of placental material and the medical necessity of all this bullshit. I could frankly care less. I was just so focused on the fraud. I could care less of what MiMedx did. And I really didn't even care about the stock price. The thing where the stock price mattered is Pete and the company used the stock and the shares to bribe doctors, probably politicians,